Chapter 1. Born Among Candles and Shadows. The streets of Boston, 1706, bustling with life, filled with the sounds of hammers, carts, and the cries of merchants. It was here, in a modest home nestled among the noise, that a boy was born. His name? Benjamin Franklin. The 15th child in a family of 17. Yes, 17. Imagine the chaos, the clamor, the constant chatter of so many siblings under one roof. His father, Josiah Franklin, was a soap and candle maker. A man of simple means but steadfast principles. He worked tirelessly, hands calloused and stained, shaping wax into candles that would bring light to Boston homes. His wife, Abiah, was the steady heart of the household, managing the endless needs of their children. Yet, even with all their effort, money was tight. The Franklin household was far from luxurious. Their home smelled of soap lye and melted tallow, and the flickering light of handmade candles was often their only source of illumination. But Benjamin, oh, Benjamin, even as a boy, was drawn to that light. He would stare into the flame, mesmerized, his young mind ablaze with questions. Why does the flame dance? Why does it flicker? What makes it burn so brightly, yet disappear so quickly? These weren't just idle thoughts. Even as a child, Benjamin's curiosity was relentless, his imagination boundless. While his siblings worked, played, or slept, Benjamin was often lost in thought, pondering the world around him. But life in the Franklin home left little room for daydreams. By the age of 10, Benjamin's formal schooling ended. His father, unable to afford more education, needed another pair of hands in the shop. And so, young Benjamin began his work, dipping wicks, pouring hot wax, and crafting candles. Hour after hour, day after day. The work was tedious, the heat oppressive. But Benjamin didn't complain. Not much, at least. He understood his family's struggles. Yet, even among the melting wax and flickering shadows, his mind burned with questions. How do candles work? What if they could burn longer? Brighter? These weren't just the musings of a restless boy. They were the first sparks of a mind that would one day change the world. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, the Franklin family would gather. They'd sit close to the hearth, the warm glow of candles casting long shadows on the walls. It was in these quiet moments that Benjamin's love for stories began. His father would read aloud from the Bible or share tales of great men, stories of courage, wisdom, and ingenuity. Benjamin listened intently, his young heart swelling with admiration. What makes a man great? He wondered. What makes his name remembered? But the books that truly captivated him weren't the ones read aloud by his father. No, they were the books he found in his father's modest library. They were worn, their pages yellowed, their covers frayed. Yet to Benjamin, they were treasures. By candlelight, he devoured them. History, philosophy, science. No subject was too daunting. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable, and the more he read, the more he wanted to know. Yet, despite his boundless curiosity, life was not without its hardships. The Franklin family's struggles weighed heavily on them all. Money was scarce. Food, at times, even scarcer. Benjamin often watched his father work late into the night, his hands moving methodically, his face lined with exhaustion. Is this what my life will be? Benjamin wondered, will I too spend my days making candles? Or, is there something more? He didn't have the answers. Not yet. But deep inside, he felt it. A spark. A longing. A belief that he was destined for something greater. One day, as he worked beside his father, dipping wicks into hot wax, he asked, "Father, why does wax harden when it cools?" His father paused, surprised by the question. He wasn't a scientist, just a tradesman. "It's just the way of things, Benjamin," he replied with a shrug. But just the way of things wasn't good enough for Benjamin. He wanted to understand. Truly understand. It was this relentless curiosity, this refusal to accept things at face value, that set him apart. Even as a boy, he questioned, he wondered, he dreamed. But Benjamin's ambitions didn't always align with his father's wishes. Josiah hoped his son would follow in his footsteps, taking over the family business. Yet Benjamin's heart wasn't in candles or soap. He wanted to explore, to learn, to create. And so the tension grew. Josiah, practical and pragmatic, couldn't understand his son's restless spirit. "Books won't put food on the table," he'd say. "Dreams won't pay the bills." But Benjamin, he couldn't let go of his dreams. He couldn't ignore the fire inside him, the fire that burned brighter than any candle. As the years passed, the boy became a young man. And though he remained in his father's shop, his thoughts often wandered far beyond its walls. He imagined other cities, other lives, other possibilities. One evening, as he stared into the flickering flame of a candle, he whispered to himself, "There must be more. There must be a way to make my mark on the world." Little did he know that mark would one day be indelible. And so, the story of Benjamin Franklin begins, not in grand halls or gilded mansions, but among candles and shadows, a boy of humble beginnings, a boy with questions that would one day lead to answers. This was just the beginning of a journey that would change history forever. Chapter 2. The Printer's Apprentice. At just 12 years old, Benjamin Franklin's life took a sharp turn. His father, Josiah, decided the boy needed a trade, something practical, something steady. And so, Benjamin was sent to apprentice under his older brother James, a printer in Boston. The printing shop was no grand palace. It was noisy, cramped, and smelled of ink and burnt paper. The rhythmic clank-clank of the press filled the air, accompanied by the constant scratch of quills and the rustling of paper. For most boys, this might have seemed dull. But for Benjamin, it was a whole new world. Here, ideas were born, stories were told, news traveled, books, pamphlets, and newspapers. Every printed word was a gateway to knowledge. And Benjamin, oh, how he longed to know more. James, however, was no kind mentor. Stern, sharp-tongued, and quick to anger, he demanded perfection from his young apprentice. "You'll work hard, Benjamin," he growled, "or you won't work at all." And work hard he did. Day after day, Benjamin set the type, cleaned the press, and folded the freshly printed sheets. His hands were always stained with ink, his back sore from long hours at the press. Yet, even as he labored, his mind wandered. Each printed page was a temptation. What secrets lay within these words? What stories? What wisdom? Late at night, when the shop was quiet and James had gone to bed, Benjamin would sneak a book from the shelves. By the dim light of a single candle, he devoured every word. Fiction, philosophy, history. It didn't matter. He read them all. One night he whispered to himself, "If knowledge is power, then I must become the most powerful man I can be." But knowledge wasn't the only thing Benjamin sought. He yearned for freedom. James, though skilled at his craft, was harsh and controlling. To him, Benjamin wasn't a brother, he was a servant. Arguments between them grew more frequent. "You're just a boy," James would sneer. "What do you know of the world?" But Benjamin, quick-witted and sharp-tongued, always had a reply. "More than you think, James. And one day the world will know my name." The tension in the shop was unbearable. Their fights became so heated, so vicious, that Benjamin began to plot his escape. Still, for all his frustrations, the printing shop was where Benjamin first discovered his voice. At 16, he began writing letters under a pseudonym, Silence Dogood. Pretending to be a witty, middle-aged widow, he submitted these letters to his brother's newspaper, the New England Courant. The letters were clever, filled with wit and wisdom. Readers loved them. They laughed, they cheered, they debated, but no one knew the truth, that the author was a mere apprentice. When James discovered Benjamin's secret, his reaction was swift and furious. "You made a fool of me," he roared. For Benjamin, it was the final straw. He couldn't stay, not under James's thumb, not in a place where his ideas and ambitions were stifled. And so, one fateful night, Benjamin made his decision. He would leave Boston. He would leave James. He would leave it all behind. The plan was daring, dangerous. As an apprentice, Benjamin was legally bound to James. Leaving without permission was an act of rebellion, a crime even. But Benjamin didn't care. He packed his few belongings, slipped out under cover of darkness, and made his way to the docks. There, he boarded a ship bound for New York. The waves rocked the small vessel as it sailed into the unknown. Benjamin stood at the bow, staring into the night, his heart pounding with fear and excitement. "I'm free," he whispered. Finally free. New York, however, was not the refuge he had hoped for. Work was scarce. Opportunities, few. But Benjamin was nothing if not resourceful. He heard whispers of a thriving printing trade in Philadelphia, a city bustling with commerce and ideas. Without hesitation, he set off. The journey was long and grueling. By land and by sea, Benjamin pressed on, braving hunger, cold, and exhaustion. When he finally arrived in Philadelphia, he was just 17. Tired, hungry, penniless, but determined. The city was alive with energy. Carts rattling down cobblestone streets, shopkeepers calling out to passers-by, and ships unloading goods at the bustling docks. To Benjamin, it was a land of opportunity. He found work at a printing shop owned by Samuel Keimer, a quirky but talented printer. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Here, Benjamin began to rebuild his life. He worked tirelessly, proving himself with every task. His intelligence, charm, and skill quickly set him apart. But even in this new city, his hunger for knowledge remained. He joined a group of like-minded thinkers, devoured books from local libraries, and began to dream of greater things. Back in Boston, James must have raged. The runaway apprentice, the little brother who defied him. But Benjamin was already far beyond James's reach. He was carving his own path, building his own future. And though he couldn't have known it at the time, his journey, his daring escape, was the first step toward a life that would change history. So, the boy who once toiled in a printing shop under his brother's watchful eye was now a young man in Philadelphia, ready to make his mark. This was no ordinary apprenticeship. This was the beginning of Benjamin Franklin's rise, from a rebellious teenager to a revolutionary thinker. And this was just the start. Chapter 3. The Streets of Philadelphia. The sun rose slowly over the Delaware River, casting its golden light on the bustling streets of Philadelphia. The city was alive with the sounds of carts rattling, merchants shouting, and the steady rhythm of hammers from the shipyards. For most, it was just another day. But for 17-year-old Benjamin Franklin, this day marked the beginning of a new life. He had arrived, alone, hungry, and without a single coin in his pocket. His clothes were wrinkled from the long journey, his shoes worn thin, but his spirit unbroken. Benjamin stepped onto the cobblestone streets, his eyes wide with wonder. The city seemed vast, alive with possibilities. He carried little, just a few belongings tied in a bundle and the unshakable determination that had brought him here. But where would he begin? He knew no one in the city, had no place to stay, no job. Still, his mind buzzed with hope. Philadelphia, a city of opportunity, he thought. If I can make it anywhere, it's here. His first stop was a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, making his stomach growl. With what little money he had borrowed before leaving, he bought a few rolls. They were warm, soft, a small comfort after days of travel. He walked the streets as he ate, observing the life around him. Merchants displayed goods outside their shops. Children played in the narrow alleys. A man with an armful of books rushed by, nearly knocking into him. Books! The sight of them ignited something in Benjamin. He paused, watching the man disappear into a shop. A printing shop? He tucked the thought away for later. As the hours passed, Benjamin's excitement gave way to exhaustion. He needed work, and soon. He approached shopkeepers, asking if they needed an extra hand. The answers were polite, but firm. No, boy, we're not hiring. Finally, he found himself at the door of a modest printing shop. The sign above read, Samuel Keimer, Printer. Benjamin hesitated. He didn't know the man, didn't even know if there was a job to be had, but he had nothing to lose. He stepped inside. The shop was noisy, the smell of ink thick in the air. Samuel Keimer, a peculiar man with a scraggly beard, looked up from his work. "Who are you?" he barked. Benjamin stood tall, despite his rumpled appearance. "My name is Benjamin Franklin. I'm a printer by trade." Keimer raised an eyebrow. "A printer, eh? You don't look like much." Benjamin smiled, disarming and confident. "Perhaps not. But give me a chance, and I'll prove you wrong." Keimer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. Let's see what you can do." And so began Benjamin's first job in Philadelphia. The work was familiar. Setting type, running the press, folding printed sheets, but the shop itself was a far cry from his brothers in Boston. Keimer was eccentric and disorganized, but he recognized talent when he saw it. Benjamin quickly proved himself to be more than just an apprentice. He wasn't content to simply follow orders. No, Benjamin observed, learned, and improved. He suggested new techniques to speed up production. He helped Keimer organize the shop, making it more efficient. And when customers came in, Benjamin's charm won them over, securing more business for the struggling printer. Within weeks, he wasn't just an employee, he was indispensable. But Benjamin's ambitions didn't end with printing. Philadelphia was a city brimming with ideas, and Benjamin wanted to be part of it all. When he wasn't working, he wandered the streets, absorbing the energy of the city. He watched craftsmen at their trades, listened to merchants haggle in the markets, and studied the faces of men deep in conversation over politics and philosophy. He was drawn to the city's intellectual life. It seemed that every corner held the promise of something new, a book to read, a skill to learn, an opportunity to seize. And Benjamin, ever curious, was determined to seize them all. One evening, as he walked along the river, the golden glow of sunset reflected on the water, Benjamin paused to reflect. He had come so far in such a short time. From the confines of his brother's shop in Boston to the bustling streets of Philadelphia, he was carving out a life of his own. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. As the city settled into the quiet of night, Benjamin returned to his small rented room. It was sparsely furnished, a bed, a desk, a single candle, but it was his, and by that candlelight he read. Books borrowed from local merchants, pamphlets left behind by customers, anything he could get his hands on. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable. He wasn't just reading for pleasure, he was preparing. Preparing for the future he could feel taking shape just beyond the horizon. The months turned into a year, and Benjamin's reputation grew. People began to notice the young printer with the sharp mind and quick wit. He was no longer just a boy from Boston. He was a part of Philadelphia, a rising star in its vibrant community. But even as he succeeded, Benjamin never forgot the struggles that had brought him here. He remembered the hunger, the rejection, the uncertainty of those first days. They fueled him, pushing him to work harder, dream bigger. And so, the boy who had arrived in Philadelphia alone and penniless was now a young man with a purpose. The city had welcomed him, challenged him, shaped him. And in return, Benjamin was beginning to shape the city itself. The streets of Philadelphia had whispered opportunities, and Benjamin Franklin had listened. This was just the beginning of his journey, the beginning of a life that would leave an indelible mark on the world. And the best was yet to come. Chapter 4. Silence, Do Good Speaks. The printing shop in Boston was alive with noise. The steady clank of the press, the rustle of paper, the sharp orders barked by James Franklin. For young Benjamin, now 16, it was the same routine day after day. Type, ink, print, fold, repeat. But Benjamin wasn't content to stay in the shadows. He wasn't just a printer's apprentice. No, he had thoughts, opinions, ideas he was desperate to share. But how? His older brother James ran the New England Courant with an iron fist. He wasn't about to let his teenage brother write for the paper. Not openly, anyway. So Benjamin hatched a plan. A daring, clever plan. Late at night, after the press had cooled and the shop was quiet, Benjamin sat by candlelight, pen in hand. He wrote furiously, pouring his wit and wisdom into a letter. But this wasn't an ordinary letter. No, this was the voice of Silence Dogood, a middle-aged widow with sharp insights and a biting sense of humor. The name was perfect, mysterious, respectable. Who would suspect a 16-year-old boy was behind it? Benjamin smiled as he signed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the shop's anonymous submissions box. By morning, it would be ready for James. When James read the letter, he was captivated. Silence. Dogood's words were clever, thoughtful, and brimming with wit. The readers of the Courant needed this voice. Without a second thought, James published it. The response was immediate. Readers loved the mysterious widow. Who was she? Where had she come from? Her words were filled with wisdom and humor that seemed both fresh and familiar. She wrote about everything, from the struggles of daily life to the hypocrisies of society. Her tone was sharp, but her words struck true. Letter after letter followed. Silence. Dogood became a sensation. The readers couldn't get enough. Men debated her opinions in the coffee houses of Boston. Women quoted her at the market. Even James, the ever-critical editor, sang her praises. And Benjamin? He watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. By day, he was the humble apprentice, folding sheets of the very paper that carried his words. By night, he was the voice that had captured the city's imagination. But writing as Silence Dogood wasn't just about entertaining readers. For Benjamin, it was a way to speak out. He wrote about the struggles of common people, the need for education, and the flaws he saw in society. He challenged the powerful, questioned authority, and urged readers to think for themselves. It was bold, audacious, revolutionary, and no one suspected the truth. For weeks, Benjamin kept his secret. Every time James praised Silence Dogood, Benjamin had to stifle a smile. But secrets have a way of coming out, and this one was no exception. One fateful evening, as Benjamin prepared the shop for the next day's printing, James burst into the room, a letter clutched in his hand. His face was red with fury. "You!" he shouted, pointing at Benjamin. "You're Silence Dogood, aren't you?" Benjamin froze. The jig was up. James's voice thundered. "How dare you deceive me, embarrass me, make a fool of me in my own paper?" Benjamin tried to explain. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you, James. I wanted to write, to share my ideas." But James wouldn't listen. "You're an apprentice, Benjamin. Nothing more. You don't get to decide what goes into my paper." The argument that followed was explosive. Benjamin, always quick-witted, defended himself with logic and humor. But James, hot-tempered and stubborn, wasn't swayed. He saw Benjamin's actions as a betrayal, a challenge to his authority. For Benjamin, it was more than just a fight. It was a turning point. Writing as Silence Doe Good had shown him something important. His voice mattered. His ideas mattered. And he didn't need anyone's permission to share them. The relationship between the brothers was never the same after that. The shop, once noisy with the sounds of the press, now echoed with tension. Every word between them was sharp, every look filled with resentment. But Benjamin didn't regret a thing. In fact, he was proud. Silence Doe Good had been his first step into the public mind, a tantalizing glimpse of what he could do, what he could become. Eventually, the letters stopped. Silence. Doe Good faded from the pages of the New England Courant. Readers wondered where she had gone. But Benjamin knew the truth. The widow's voice might have been silenced, but the ideas she had sparked would live on. For Benjamin, this was just the beginning. He had tasted the power of words, the way they could move people, challenge ideas, and change the world. And he wanted more. In the years to come, Benjamin Franklin would write many things, pamphlets, essays, letters, even a constitution. But it all started here, in the cramped little printing shop in Boston, with a quill, a candle, and the bold imagination of a boy who dared to speak. Silence. Doe Good had spoken, and though her voice was gone, Benjamin's journey was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Lightning Rod of Ambition. Philadelphia, 1727, a city bustling with life and possibility. By now, Benjamin Franklin had made a name for himself, not just as a skilled printer, but as a man of ideas, a thinker, a dreamer. But Benjamin wasn't content to stop there. He never was. He walked the cobblestone streets with purpose, his mind racing with questions. Why does the world work as it does? How can we make it better? These questions followed him like a shadow, urging him forward. He wanted answers. But more than that, he wanted people to talk about them. That's when the idea struck. What if there were a place, a group of people dedicated to discussion, to discovery, to improvement, not just for themselves, but for the world around them? Benjamin smiled. It was audacious, ambitious, perfect. He began reaching out to men he admired, craftsmen, merchants, and scholars, asking them to join him in this experiment. They were skeptics at first. A club for ideas? One man scoffed. We're busy enough with work. But Benjamin's charm was impossible to resist. Work makes us survive, he replied. Ideas help us thrive. And so they came. 12 men from all walks of life, gathering in a small room above a Philadelphia shop. This was the beginning of the junto, a society like no other. From the very first meeting, the energy was electric. Benjamin set the tone, opening with a question. What do you know that others in the group might benefit from learning? It was simple, direct, but it sparked something. One man shared news about advances in farming. Another spoke of trade routes and market trends. Benjamin, always listening, soaked it all in. The discussions were lively, sometimes heated, but they were always respectful. The men shared ideas, challenged each other, and left each meeting with a sense of purpose. But the junto wasn't just about talking. Oh no, it was about action. Benjamin began proposing projects, ways the group could improve their city. "What if we had a lending library?" he suggested one evening. "A place where anyone could borrow books and learn, no matter their station in life." The men nodded, intrigued. "But who would pay for it?" someone asked. "We will," Benjamin replied. "Together. We'll each contribute a small sum. It's an investment in the minds of our fellow citizens." And so they did. The library was established, the first of its kind in America. It was an instant success. Farmers borrowed books on agriculture. Artisans read about new techniques. Ordinary people gained access to knowledge they had never dreamed of. This was just the beginning. The Junto became a force for change in Philadelphia. They proposed ideas for street cleaning, fire prevention, and public safety. Each time, Benjamin led the charge, turning discussions into plans and plans into action. But it wasn't just about practical matters. The group delved into philosophy, science, and human nature. They debated morality and ethics, religion, and politics. For Benjamin, these discussions were fuel. Every meeting sparked new ideas, new ambitions. And while the Junto thrived on collaboration, Benjamin began to realize something powerful. He wasn't just a participant in these discussions. He was a leader. Outside of the Junto, Benjamin's ambition burned just as brightly. He expanded his printing business, publishing newspapers and almanacs that reached thousands of readers. Poor Richard's Almanac, filled with witty proverbs and practical advice, became a staple in households across the colonies. But Franklin wasn't content with simply running a business. He had to innovate. In the quiet hours of the night, he tinkered, invented, experimented. His mind was a storm, and the Junto meetings only added to its fury. Ideas collided, merged, and transformed into something extraordinary. One evening, during a particularly spirited Junto debate, the conversation turned to electricity. It was a mysterious force, poorly understood, but endlessly fascinating. "What is it, really?" someone asked. Benjamin's eyes lit up. "It's a force of nature," he said, "waiting to be understood, controlled." The room fell silent. Controlled? Could it be possible? For most, it was a passing thought. But for Benjamin, it was a challenge. He began conducting experiments in secret, testing theories, observing results. It was dangerous work. But for Franklin, danger was a small price to pay for discovery. As the years passed, the Junto grew, both in size and influence. Its members became leaders in their own right, shaping the city of Philadelphia into a beacon of progress. And Benjamin? He continued to balance ambition with camaraderie. The Junto wasn't just a club to him. It was a family, a community of minds, each sparking the other, building something greater than themselves. Through it all, Franklin remained humble, curious, relentless. The Junto meetings ended late at night, the room dimly lit by a single flickering candle. Benjamin often lingered after the others had gone, staring into the flame, his mind alive with possibility. The lightning rod of ambition had been struck, and Benjamin Franklin was just getting started. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6, A Poor Man's Almanac. Philadelphia, 1732. The city was growing, bustling, changing. People poured into its streets, searching for opportunity, for hope, for something more. Among them were farmers, shopkeepers, craftsmen, ordinary people with extraordinary dreams. But life was hard, money scarce, and for many, the world felt too big, too unforgiving. Benjamin Franklin saw this struggle, felt it, knew it all too well. He had walked that same road, hungry, penniless, unsure of his place. But Franklin was different. Where others saw obstacles, he saw opportunities, and he believed deeply that knowledge was the key to unlocking them. That year, Franklin did something bold, audacious. He published a book, not a thick, intimidating tome for scholars, but a small, humble almanac. Poor Richard's Almanac, he called it. And while it appeared simple, a collection of weather predictions, planting schedules, and household tips, it was so much more. It was a guide, a compass, a voice of encouragement for the common man. At the heart of the almanac was Poor Richard, a fictional character Franklin created. Richard was clever, practical, wise, but most importantly, he spoke in a way that anyone could understand. Through Richard, Franklin shared proverbs and advice that were short, sharp, and unforgettable. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A penny saved is a penny earned. Diligence is the mother of good luck. These weren't just words, they were lessons. Franklin wasn't preaching from on high. He was reaching out, meeting people where they were, offering them tools to improve their lives. The almanac was an instant hit. Farmers read it by the light of a lantern in their barns. Merchants kept copies at their stalls. Mothers quoted it to their children as they worked around the hearth. But why? Why did Poor Richard's Almanac resonate so deeply? Because it wasn't just about information. It was about empowerment. Franklin understood something profound. People didn't need someone to hand them success. They needed to believe they could create it themselves. And that belief, that's what Poor Richard gave them. Behind the witty proverbs and clever phrases lay Franklin's true genius. He knew that big ideas had to be delivered in small, simple packages. A single sentence could carry the weight of a lifetime's wisdom. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Franklin's readers didn't just memorize these lines, they lived by them. They planned their days, saved their pennies, worked harder, dreamed bigger. Yet, for all its wit and wisdom, Poor Richard's Almanac wasn't without humor. Franklin had a sharp tongue and a mischievous mind. He filled the pages with jokes and playful barbs, poking fun at laziness, ignorance, and vanity. One of Poor Richard's most famous quips, "Three may keep a secret, if two of them are dead." Readers laughed, nodded, and, more often than not, saw themselves in Richard's words. But Franklin's vision went deeper still. He wasn't just creating an almanac. He was creating a culture. At a time when the colonies were divided, struggling to find their identity, Poor Richard's Almanac became a unifying thread. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, farmer or merchant, northerner or southerner. Franklin's words spoke to everyone. And in speaking to everyone, Franklin gave them something priceless: a sense of possibility. Year after year, Franklin published new editions of the almanac, each one built on the last, filled with fresh advice, new jokes, and sharper insights. It became a staple in colonial life, a must-have for anyone who wanted to succeed. But Franklin didn't stop there. He used the success of Poor Richard's Almanac to fund his other ventures, to expand his printing business, support public projects, and fuel his endless pursuit of knowledge. It wasn't just a book. It was a foundation, a springboard, a means to an end. And yet, Franklin remained humble. He never claimed the Proverbs as his own, often crediting them to Poor Richard or other sources. But make no mistake, the voice of the almanac was Franklin's, his wit, his wisdom, his belief in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. One cold winter evening, Franklin sat by the fire, a fresh copy of the almanac in his hands. He read through its pages, smiling at the thought of farmers reading his words as they prepared for spring. He imagined merchants quoting Poor Richard as they bartered in the marketplace. He pictured children, their eyes wide with curiosity, learning lessons that would stay with them for a lifetime. This was why he wrote. Because Franklin wasn't just a printer, or a businessman, or a philosopher. He was a teacher, a guide, a friend to anyone willing to listen. Years later, as Franklin's life took him to new heights, diplomacy, science, revolution, he often looked back on Poor Richard's Almanac with pride, not because it made him famous, but because it made a difference. Words, he once said, may not build houses or grow crops, but they can build dreams. And that, more than anything, was Franklin's gift. The humble almanac, so simple, so unassuming, had sparked something extraordinary. It had taught a generation to think bigger, work harder, and believe in themselves. And Franklin? He wasn't done yet. Because Poor Richard's greatest lesson was this: success isn't about where you start. It's about where you're going. And Benjamin Franklin was just getting started. Chapter 7. The Spark of Genius. The storm rolled in slowly. Heavy clouds gathered in the sky, dark and ominous. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and menacing, as the wind began to whip through the trees. It was the kind of storm that sent people scurrying indoors, seeking the safety of their hearths. But not Benjamin Franklin. No, Franklin stood ready, prepared. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With a kite in one hand and a spool of twine in the other, he ventured out into the open field, his son William reluctantly following behind him. "Father," William called, his voice tinged with worry. "Are you sure this is safe?" Franklin turned, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Nothing worthwhile comes without risk, my boy." For years, Franklin had been fascinated by electricity, a mysterious force that seemed both magical and powerful. He had studied it, experimented with it, even written about it. But there was one question that lingered in his mind. Was electricity the same force that danced across the sky during a storm? The scientific world was skeptical. Some called the idea foolish, dangerous, impossible. But Franklin wasn't deterred. He had a theory, and tonight he would prove it. The wind howled as Franklin positioned the kite, its simple wooden frame covered in silk. A thin metal rod extended from its top, designed to attract lightning. At the bottom of the string, he attached a metal key. "Watch closely," he said to William, his voice steady despite the growing storm. The kite rose into the sky, climbing higher and higher, its tail fluttering wildly in the wind. Franklin held the string tightly, feeling the tension as the storm clouds loomed above. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of rain pattering against the ground. The occasional flicker of distant lightning. And then, it happened. A bright flash lit up the sky. The kite jerked violently as a bolt of lightning streaked down, its raw power surging through the string. Franklin felt it, a sudden sharp jolt in his hand as the key crackled with energy. Electricity! The realization hit him like the thunderclap that followed. The lightning, the electricity, they were one and the same. "By heavens," Franklin whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "It's true." He held the string tighter, watching as sparks leapt from the key to his knuckles. The raw, untamed force of nature was now within his grasp. Not to control, but to understand. William, wide-eyed and frightened, tugged at his father's arm. "That's enough, Father. You've proven it." Franklin nodded, his heart racing. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the kite, his hands steady despite the storm raging around him. When the kite finally touched the ground, Franklin stood there for a moment, drenched and exhilarated. He had done it. But this experiment wasn't just a spectacle. It was a turning point. Franklin's discovery that lightning was a form of electricity was revolutionary. It challenged centuries of understanding, opening the door to a new age of science and innovation. And Franklin didn't stop there. He immediately began applying his findings, inventing tools that would harness and study this mysterious force. The lightning rod, for instance, was born of Franklin's experiments. A simple yet brilliant device designed to protect buildings from the devastating power of lightning strikes. It wasn't just science. It was a gift to humanity. Word of Franklin's experiments spread quickly, crossing oceans and igniting imaginations. Scientists in Europe marveled at his ingenuity. Philosophers praised his courage. Even ordinary people, who once feared the wrath of storms, began to see lightning not as divine punishment, but as a natural force that could be understood and tamed. Franklin, of course, remained humble. "I was merely curious," he would say, brushing off accolades with a smile. But those who knew him understood the truth. His curiosity had sparked something far greater than an experiment. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, as Franklin dried himself by the fire, he reflected on what had just occurred. He thought of the kite, still drying in the corner of the room. The key, now just a simple piece of metal. But more than that, he thought of the questions still unanswered. What else could electricity do? What other mysteries did the universe hold? For Franklin, discovery wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Years later, When asked about that fateful storm, Franklin would describe it simply, "The pursuit of knowledge is worth any risk." But those who heard the story knew better. It wasn't just about the storm, or the kite, or the lightning. It was about the man, a man who dared to ask questions when others were content with answers. And in doing so, Benjamin Franklin lit a spark that would never go out. The storm may have passed, but the light it revealed would shine forever. Chapter 8. The Inventor's Workshop. Step into Benjamin Franklin's workshop, a world of creative chaos. The air hums with possibility. Tools are scattered across the wooden workbench, hammers, pliers, strange contraptions in various stages of completion. Sheets of paper filled with sketches and scribbled notes cover every surface. The faint smell of hot metal lingers, and at the center of it all, Franklin himself, sleeves rolled up, eyes alight with curiosity. This wasn't just a room, it was a laboratory, a sanctuary for ideas, a place where problems became possibilities and possibilities became solutions. Franklin's inventions didn't come from a desire for fame or wealth. No, they came from a deep, unshakable need to improve the world around him, to solve the little inconveniences of daily life, to make things better, easier, more efficient. Take the Franklin stove, for instance. It began with a problem: heating. Colonial homes were heated by open fireplaces which were inefficient and dangerous. They consumed vast amounts of wood, yet much of the heat escaped up the chimney. Franklin looked at the crackling fire and thought, there has to be a better way. And so, he got to work. Days turned into weeks as Franklin sketched and tinkered. The solution he arrived at was elegant in its simplicity. A cast-iron stove that stood in the center of the room, radiating heat in all directions. It required less wood and produced more warmth, a true marvel of efficiency. When Franklin unveiled the stove to his friends, they were amazed. "This will change everything," one exclaimed, but Franklin simply shrugged. "It's not about changing everything," he said. "It's about solving one problem at a time." The Franklin stove became a sensation, adopted by homes across the colonies. Yet Franklin refused to patent it. He believed inventions should benefit everyone, not just the inventor. "We are all part of society," he wrote, "and should do what we can to improve it." The stove was just one of many creations to emerge from Franklin's workshop. His mind was constantly at work, always asking questions, always seeking solutions. One day, while reading by the fire, Franklin found himself squinting. His vision, once sharp, had grown weaker with age. He had 2 pairs of glasses, one for reading and one for seeing at a distance. But switching between them was a nuisance. "There must be a better way," he muttered to himself. And so, he invented bifocals. The design was simple, yet brilliant. A single pair of glasses with 2 sections, one for near vision and one for far. For Franklin, it was a revelation. For the world, it was a revolution. Then, there was the glass harmonica. Music had always been a source of joy for Franklin. One evening, he attended a concert where a musician played haunting melodies by rubbing his fingers along the rims of crystal glasses. The sound was ethereal, otherworldly. Franklin was captivated. How can this be improved? He wondered. back in his workshop, he began experimenting. His solution: a series of glass bowls, each tuned to a specific note, mounted on a spinning rod. The musician could play it by simply touching the bowls with wet fingers. The result was magical. The glass harmonica produced sounds unlike anything heard before. It became wildly popular, played by musicians across Europe and America. Even Mozart and Beethoven composed pieces for it. But Franklin's inventions weren't just about practicality or entertainment. They reflected his deep understanding of science and his ability to think creatively. Take his experiments with electricity, for example. After proving that lightning was a form of electricity, Franklin invented the lightning rod, a simple device that protected buildings from lightning strikes. It was elegant, practical, life-saving. And like so many of his inventions, it came from Franklin's desire to help others. He didn't seek recognition. He sought solutions. In the quiet of his workshop, Franklin often paused to reflect. He thought of the world outside, its challenges, its complexities. Every problem he encountered was like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The Franklin stove, the bifocals, the glass harmonica, they were all pieces of a larger picture. And yet, Franklin remained humble. To him, invention wasn't about brilliance or genius. It was about curiosity, hard work, perseverance. Necessity, he liked to say, is the mother of invention. But Franklin's workshop wasn't just a place for tools and experiments. It was a reflection of the man himself, practical, imaginative, and endlessly curious. To step into that room was to step into Franklin's mind, a mind that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Years later, as Franklin looked back on his life, he often thought of the hours spent in that workshop, the failures, the triumphs, the moments of inspiration that seemed to come out of nowhere. Each invention told a story, not just of ingenuity, but of a man who never stopped asking questions, who never stopped believing in the power of ideas. And though the tools would one day fall silent, the legacy of that workshop, of Franklin's restless creativity, would live on. Because Benjamin Franklin wasn't just an inventor. He was a problem solver, a dreamer, a man who dared to believe that the world could be better, and who worked tirelessly to make it so. Chapter 9. Diplomat of the Revolution. The room was grand. Gold-framed mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the glow of countless candles. Fine crystals sparkled on the table. Laughter and chatter filled the air as elegantly dressed men and women moved gracefully through the salon. And there, in the center of it all, stood Benjamin Franklin. At 70 years old, Franklin was unlike anyone else in the room. His hair, now thin and white, was pulled back into a simple ponytail. His clothes were plain, almost humble, compared to the silks and lace around him. Yet, it was Franklin who drew the most attention. His wit, his charm, his reputation. They all preceded him. And behind the spectacles perched on his nose was a sharp, calculating mind, one determined to save a revolution. The year was 1776. The colonies were at war with Great Britain. The stakes could not have been higher. America's survival depended on allies, soldiers, supplies, ships. Without them, the revolution would fail. The Continental Congress knew this. they also knew there was only one man who could win the support they so desperately needed: Benjamin Franklin. Franklin arrived in Paris to a hero's welcome. He was already famous in Europe. His experiments with electricity and his inventions had made him a household name. The French adored him. They called him the philosopher from the New World. But Franklin wasn't here for applause. He was here to persuade one of the most powerful nations in the world to support an uncertain cause. France had little reason to trust the fledgling colonies. They were weak, divided, unproven. But Franklin knew how to play the game. His strategy was simple, but brilliant. He made himself the symbol of the American spirit. He wore a fur hat instead of a wig, embracing the image of the rugged American frontiersman. In a city obsessed with fashion and elegance, Franklin stood out. And the French loved it. But his charm wasn't just for show. Franklin used every conversation, every meeting, every dinner to his advantage. He spoke of liberty, of justice, of the shared struggle against tyranny. His words were carefully chosen, his arguments impossible to ignore. And then there were his connections. Franklin mingled with the most influential figures in France: aristocrats, philosophers, military leaders. He moved through their circles with ease, winning their admiration and, more importantly, their trust. The negotiations, however, were anything but easy. France hesitated. War with Britain was no small matter. Franklin faced skepticism, doubt, even outright opposition. But he refused to give up. In the glittering salons of Paris, Franklin dazzled with his humor and intellect. In quiet meetings behind closed doors, he argued with unwavering determination. Every letter he wrote, every speech he gave, every toast he raised was part of a larger plan. Franklin wasn't just a diplomat, he was a strategist. And then, finally, the breakthrough. In 1778, France officially recognized the United States of America. The Treaty of Alliance was signed, and with it came the support the colonies so desperately needed: troops, money, and a powerful navy. It was a turning point in the war. But Franklin's work was far from over. Even as the alliance with France strengthened, the war dragged on. Franklin juggled countless responsibilities, coordinating shipments of supplies, managing political tensions, and continuing to advocate for the American cause. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, penning letters and drafting treaties by candlelight. His health began to suffer. His body grew weaker. But Franklin pressed on, driven by the belief that independence was worth any sacrifice. Through it all, Franklin never lost his humor or his charm. At one dinner, a French nobleman, skeptical of America's chances, said, "Surely, Monsieur Franklin, you do not expect to defeat the mighty British Empire?" Franklin smiled, raised his glass, and replied, "We may not defeat them, sir, but we may outlast them." The room erupted in laughter, and though Franklin's words were light-hearted, they carried a truth that could not be denied. Years later, when the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, officially ending the war, Franklin was there. His name appeared on the document alongside John Adams and John Jay. For Franklin, It was the culmination of years of relentless effort. As he stood in the room where the treaty was signed, he thought of everything it had taken to get here. The storms weathered, the battles fought, the alliances forged. It was not a victory for one man, or even one nation. It was a victory for an idea, the idea that liberty and justice were worth fighting for. And so, the elder statesman returned home, hailed as a hero. But Franklin, ever humble, knew the truth. It wasn't his charm, his wit, or even his intellect that had won the war. It was the courage of countless men and women who believed in a better future. Franklin had simply helped to light the way. The salons of Paris grew quiet. The war ended. But the thread Franklin wove, his diplomacy, his strategy, his relentless pursuit of independence, remained strong. And in the hearts of the people, both in America and abroad, Benjamin Franklin would always be remembered, not just as a diplomat, but as a builder of nations. Chapter 10. A Founding Father. The year was 1787. The summer air hung thick and heavy over Philadelphia. Inside Independence Hall, the heat was stifling. The windows were closed tightly, keeping out the noise and the prying ears of the world outside. The air inside was no cooler, filled with tension, debate, and the low murmur of men arguing the future of a nation. Benjamin Franklin sat near the front of the room. At 81 years old, he was the eldest delegate at the Constitutional Convention. His body, worn by years of service and illness, moved slowly now. But his mind? As sharp as ever. The task before them was monumental. The Articles of Confederation had failed, leaving the young United States weak and divided. Now, these men had come together to craft something stronger, something that could hold 13 independent states together in unity. But agreement did not come easily. Voices rose, tempers flared. Large states wanted more power. Small states demanded equality. Some feared a strong central government, while others feared chaos without it. And Franklin? He listened, patiently, thoughtfully, watching the arguments unfold like a master chess player studying the board. Franklin had no illusions about the challenge before them. "Gentlemen," he said one day, his voice calm but firm, "we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." The room fell silent. The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a debate. It was survival. Over the weeks that followed, Franklin became the voice of reason in a room full of division. His humor diffused tension. His wisdom bridged divides. When tempers flared over representation in Congress, Franklin offered a compromise, a Senate where each state had equal votes and a House of Representatives based on population. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep the conversation moving. Time and time again, Franklin urged unity. "We are not enemies," he reminded them. "We are builders. Let us build something that will endure." The debates dragged on through the sweltering summer. Each day, Franklin arrived early, leaning on his cane as he entered the hall. He would take his seat, adjust his spectacles, and watch as history unfolded around him. And then, finally, after months of sweat, tears, and endless compromise, they had it. The Constitution. The final draft was read aloud to the room. The words echoed off the walls, filling the space with a sense of gravity and purpose. Franklin listened closely, nodding at times, smiling faintly at others. When the reading was finished, the delegates sat in silence. The weight of what they had accomplished pressed down on them. This was no ordinary document. It was a blueprint for a nation. As the delegates prepared to sign the Constitution, Franklin rose slowly to his feet. All eyes turned to him. He looked at the chair where George Washington had presided over the convention. Its back was carved with a sun, half risen, half set. "I have often looked at that sun," Franklin said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have wondered whether it was rising or setting, but now I have the happiness to know that it is a rising sun." The delegates burst into applause. Even those who had been bitterly divided could not help but feel the hope in Franklin's words. As the ink dried on the Constitution, Franklin stepped outside into the bright Philadelphia sunlight. A crowd had gathered, waiting anxiously for news. A woman approached him, her voice eager. "Dr. Franklin," she asked, "what have we got? A monarchy or a republic?" Franklin paused, his face serious but kind. "A republic," he replied, "if you can keep it." Those words would echo through history. They were more than an answer to a question. They were a challenge, a reminder that democracy is fragile, a gift that must be protected and nurtured. Franklin knew this better than anyone. He had seen what division could do. He had seen the cost of freedom. And he had spent his life ensuring that the light of liberty would never be extinguished. The Constitution was not perfect. Franklin himself admitted as much. But it was a beginning, a foundation, and for Franklin, that was enough. "It is the work of many hands," he said, "and many minds. No one's ideas have prevailed entirely, but all have contributed something to the greater good." In the years that followed, Franklin would reflect often on that summer. The debates, the compromises, the moments of doubt, and the flashes of inspiration. But more than anything, he would remember the men, flawed, passionate, determined, who had come together to create something greater than themselves. And Franklin, ever humble, would simply say, "I was fortunate to be there." The Constitution was signed, the United States was born, and Benjamin Franklin, the printer, the inventor, the philosopher, the diplomat, was now forever a founding father. Chapter 11. The Man Behind the Myth. Benjamin Franklin, inventor, diplomat, founding father, a man whose name is etched in the annals of history, whose achievements shaped a nation, and whose wisdom continues to inspire. But behind the myth was a man with flaws, a man who stumbled, a man who, like all of us, was shaped by his struggles as much as his successes. This is the story of Franklin, not as a legend, but as a human being. Franklin was a man of ambition, relentless, unyielding ambition. It was this drive that took him from a poor apprentice to one of the most celebrated figures of his time. But ambition has a cost. His relationship with his brother James, for instance, was marked by conflict. As a young apprentice in James's printing shop, Franklin bristled under his brother's authority. Their arguments were fiery, their bond irreparably strained. When Franklin fled Boston to start a new life, he left not just a city, but a family. And though Franklin's success would later eclipse James's, the bitterness between them lingered. Franklin never forgot the sting of those early years. Nor did James. Then there was William, Franklin's son, his firstborn. The boy he once cradled in his arms, full of love and hope. But as William grew, so too did the distance between father and son. The divide became a chasm during the American Revolution. Franklin, the staunch patriot, believed in liberty and independence. William, the loyalist, sided with the crown. The betrayal cut deep. Franklin, who had dedicated his life to the idea of unity, found his own family fractured. Their correspondence grew colder, sharper, until finally it stopped altogether. Even after the war ended, the wounds between them remained. William left for England, and though they exchanged a few letters in later years, the bond was never fully repaired. Franklin's personal life was no less complicated. He was a man of great charm, but also of contradictions. Deborah Reed, the woman who would become his wife, shared decades of her life with him. Yet their marriage was far from perfect. Franklin's long absences, first to London, then to Paris, left Deborah to manage their household and business alone. She wrote to him often, pouring out her thoughts and frustrations. But Franklin, consumed by his work, often delayed his replies. When Deborah died in 1774, Franklin was abroad. He hadn't been by her side in her final moments, a regret that perhaps lingered in his heart. And then there was his reputation. For all his brilliance, Franklin was no stranger to controversy. Some accused him of being manipulative, even ruthless, in his pursuit of success. He was a master of self-promotion, carefully crafting his image as a man of the people. The fur hat he famously wore in Paris? It was no accident. Franklin understood the power of perception, and he used it to his advantage. Critics called him opportunistic, a man who valued ambition over loyalty. But Franklin saw it differently. "What is success," he once wrote, "if not the ability to adapt?" Even his famous wit had its darker side. Franklin's sharp tongue and biting humor often came at the expense of others. He used satire as a weapon, skewering opponents in print with words that stung like a blade. Yet, for all his flaws, Franklin was a man who learned, a man who grew. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to reflect on his own shortcomings. In his later years, Franklin wrote extensively about the importance of humility, patience, and forgiveness. He even created a system to improve his character, a list of 13 virtues, from temperance to sincerity, which he tracked in a small notebook. Each week, he focused on mastering one virtue, marking his successes and failures with meticulous care. Perfection, Franklin admitted, is unattainable, but the pursuit of it, that is where we find meaning. It was this willingness to confront his own humanity that set Franklin apart. He was not a man who denied his flaws. He embraced them, learned from them, used them as stepping stones to become better, and in doing so, he inspired others to do the same. In the end, Franklin's greatness wasn't in his perfection. It was in his imperfections, his ability to stumble and get back up, to fail and try again, to hurt and seek forgiveness. He was a man who understood that the road to wisdom is paved with mistakes. That true greatness isn't about being flawless. It's about striving to be better every single day. As Franklin's life drew to a close, he reflected on his journey, the triumphs, the failures, the loves he had cherished, and the relationships he had lost. "I have lived a long life," he wrote, "and I have made many errors, but I have also done some good, and for that I am grateful." Benjamin Franklin was no saint. He was a man who laughed, stumbled, loved, failed, and succeeded. And it is in his humanity that we find his true greatness. Because Franklin's story is not just the story of one man, it is the story of all of us, the dreamers, the strivers, the imperfect souls who dare to reach for something more. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Lightning. Benjamin Franklin died on April 17, 1790, at the age of 84. The streets of Philadelphia were silent that day, as if the city itself paused to mourn. More than 20,000 people came to pay their respects, friends, admirers, ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by Franklin's ideas, his inventions, his vision. But Franklin's story didn't end with his death. Far from it. His name lives on, not just in history books or statues, but in the very fabric of our world. Take the lightning rod, a simple invention born of curiosity and courage that has saved countless lives and buildings from destruction. Even now, centuries later, Franklin's rods stand tall, protecting us from nature's fiercest storms. And the bifocals? Millions of people still wear them today, a quiet testament to Franklin's desire to solve life's little inconveniences. The Franklin stove, the glass harmonica, the lending library, the fire department. The list goes on and on. Each invention, each idea, a spark of brilliance that continues to glow. But Franklin's greatest legacy isn't found in the objects he created. It's found in the ideas he championed. Democracy, education, curiosity. Franklin believed in the power of knowledge, the power of the mind to transform the world. He founded schools, supported scientific research, and encouraged others to think, to question, to explore. He didn't just dream of a better world. He worked tirelessly to build it. And then there are his words. Early to bed, early to rise. A penny saved is a penny earned. Well done is better than well said. These proverbs, simple yet profound, still resonate. They remind us of Franklin's belief in hard work, resilience, and the value of every moment. Yet Franklin's impact goes even deeper. He was a founding father, one of the architects of the United States. His signature appears on the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Paris, and the Constitution, a testament to his pivotal role in shaping a nation. And his words, spoken at the Constitutional Convention, still echo through time. A republic, if you can keep it. It's a challenge as much as a reminder. A call to action for every generation to protect the fragile brilliance of democracy. Franklin's influence wasn't limited to America. He was a global figure, admired in Europe, Asia, and beyond. His experiments with electricity inspired scientists around the world. His diplomatic skills helped forge alliances that changed the course of history. He was, in every sense, a citizen of the world. But what makes Franklin truly remarkable isn't just his accomplishments. It's his spirit. The boy who read by candlelight. the young man who fled Boston with nothing but a dream, the inventor who risked his life to harness the power of lightning. Franklin's life was a testament to the power of curiosity, the importance of resilience, the belief that one person armed with ideas and determination can change the world. And so, his story continues. Every time someone invents something new, Franklin is there. Every time someone questions the status quo, Franklin is there. Every time someone dares to dream of a better future, Franklin is there. His light still shines. A beacon for dreamers and doers. For those who stumble, yet rise again. For those who ask, why not? As Franklin himself once wrote, "The noblest question in the world is, what good may I do in it?" It's a question that guided his life, and one that continues to guide us all. Benjamin Franklin, the man who captured lightning, who shaped a nation, who inspired the world,